After my surgery, I thought my son would stand by my side ready to take me home. Instead, he looked me in the eye and said, "I don't have time for you. Stay at the hospital." In that moment, the man I had raised with love and sacrifice left me abandoned, helpless, and broken. But what he didn't know was that betrayal has consequences. And when the lawyer later read my will out loud, my son discovered a truth that shook him to his core. Sometimes, greed costs you everything. If this story grips you already, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with friends who love stories of betrayal and justice. And tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching from tonight? I woke up to the sound of machines beeping and the faint chatter of nurses behind the curtain. The air was cold, sharp with disinfectant, the kind that clung to your lungs long after you breathed it in. My body felt heavier than stone, each limb wrapped in exhaustion. But through the haze of anesthesia, I remembered one thing clearly. I had made it through surgery. In my mind, there was no question who would be there when I opened my eyes. My son Michael, my only son, the boy I had raised with calloused hands and sleepless nights, the man I had sacrificed everything for. Surely, after all those years, he would be waiting to take me home, to steady my steps when I faltered. That was what family was for. But when the curtain slid back and I saw him, the look in his eyes wasn't warmth. It wasn't relief. It was annoyance, as if my survival had inconvenienced him. "You're awake," he muttered, glancing at his phone more than at me. I tried to smile, weak but hopeful. "Just in time. I'll be discharged today. You can take me home." Michael finally looked at me, and I'll never forget the words that came out of his mouth. "I don't have time for you. Stay at the hospital." Just like that. Cold. Final. As though I were not his father, but a stranger asking for a ride. The words pierced me deeper than the surgeon's scalpel ever could. I had imagined gratitude, maybe even pride. Instead, what I saw was calculation in his eyes. Michael wasn't here out of love. He was here to check whether I had survived or not. The silence between us stretched. My throat tightened, but I forced myself to speak. "Michael, I can't stay here. They'll need the bed. I don't even have a change of clothes." He shrugged, eyes still glued to the glowing screen in his hand. "You'll figure it out. They'll take care of you. I've got more important things to do." More important things. I thought of his childhood, when he was small enough to sit on my shoulders. I carried him through snowstorms, bought him shoes when I wore holes in mine, and stayed awake night after night building a business so he could have opportunities I never dreamed of. All of it, apparently, amounted to nothing more than an old man who was now a burden. Nurse Clara appeared just then, cheerful as ever. "Mr. Cole, we'll have your discharge papers ready by noon. Do you have someone picking you up?" I looked at Michael, silently begging him to step forward, to redeem himself. Instead, he slipped his phone back into his pocket, gave me one last glance, and muttered, "I'll see you around." Then he walked away. My chest felt hollow. The nurse's smile faltered when she realized what had just happened, but she was too professional to say anything. She patted my hand gently before slipping out again, leaving me to the hum of the machines and the cold that seemed to spread inside me. Hours passed slowly. Other patients were wheeled out by families, greeted with flowers and warm coats. I sat by the window in my thin hospital gown, staring at the snow piling against the glass. Each flake seemed to whisper the same thing. "You are alone." I thought of Anna, my late wife. If she had been alive, she would never have allowed Michael to treat me this way. She had been the glue of our family, the heart that beat for both of us. But now, with her gone, the cracks had widened into chasms. Michael's ambition had consumed him, leaving no space for compassion. When Nurse Clara returned with the discharge papers, she tried again. "Mr. Cole, do you want us to call someone else? A neighbor, perhaps? You shouldn't go out alone in this weather." I shook my head. "No, I'll manage." And I did, though it nearly broke me. I shuffled through the hospital doors into the biting wind, my coat thin, my breath clouding in the air. Each step toward the bus stop was a reminder, not of my frailty, but of my son's betrayal. The bus ride home was long, filled with strangers who barely glanced at me. I stared at the passing streets, the shops lit with warm yellow light, families walking arm in arm. Each scene pressed the weight of loneliness deeper into my chest. When I finally reached my house, the silence hit me like a wall. The home Anna and I had built together, filled once with laughter and warmth, now felt like a mausoleum. I lowered myself into the chair in the living room, the one she used to complain was too old, too worn, and let the quiet swallow me. Michael's words replayed in my head, sharp and cruel. Stay at the hospital. As if I were an inconvenience to be left behind. But the more I sat in that silence, the more another thought began to form. Maybe Michael thought I was weak. Maybe he believed I had nothing left to give, nothing left to fight for. Maybe he thought his inheritance was already secured, and that he could treat me like yesterday's news. If so, he was gravely mistaken. Because while my body was weak, my mind was sharper than ever, and if Michael wanted to forget who built the life he lived so comfortably, I would remind him, not with anger, not with shouting, but with something far more powerful. The truth. And the truth was sealed, waiting in the hands of my lawyer. When the time came, Michael would hear every word out loud, and in that moment he would realize the cost of his betrayal. I leaned back in my chair, exhaustion pulling at me, but beneath the weariness burned something new. Not despair, but resolve, because Michael thought he had abandoned me in a hospital bed. What he didn't know was that I had already set the stage for his reckoning. And soon he would face it. The phone on the table buzzed with a message from Helen Graves, my lawyer. One sentence lit up the screen. Edward, it's time. The ride home had drained what little strength surgery had left me with, but stepping into my own house felt worse than the walk through the snow. The door creaked open, and a wave of stillness met me, a silence so deep it pressed against my chest. Once this house had been alive. Anna's laughter echoing from the kitchen, Michael's footsteps pounding up the stairs, music drifting from the old radio on Sunday mornings. Now it was just wood and stone, hollow and unfeeling. I dropped my small hospital bag near the doorway and hung my coat with trembling hands. My breath still showed in faint clouds. The heat hadn't kicked in properly yet. The house smelled faintly of dust and cold air, as though it had forgotten me during my absence. I stood there, staring at the photographs on the wall, each one a frozen memory. There was one of Anna and me, taken on our 25th anniversary. Her smile had been radiant, her arm looped through mine, her eyes sparkling with warmth. She had been the bridge between me and Michael. Without her, the bridge had collapsed. I shuffled into the living room, each step reminding me of the ache in my bones. I lowered myself into the recliner, the same one Anna used to call that old ugly chair. I'd kept it anyway. Stubbornness, she'd said. But the truth was, it had been the one place in this house where I felt steady, grounded. I sat there, staring at the empty fireplace, listening to the hum of the furnace struggling to warm the place. My body begged for rest, but my mind refused to quiet down. Michael's words repeated, relentless. Stay at the hospital. He hadn't just left me there. He had written me off, dismissed me as a burden no longer worth his time. The hurt cut deeper because I remembered when the roles were reversed. When Michael was a boy, he had broken his leg in a soccer game. I spent 3 nights sleeping in a hospital chair, my hand wrapped around his, whispering stories to calm him down. I had promised him then that he would never be alone, that no matter what, his father would always be there, and now, decades later, he had broken that promise to me without a flicker of guilt. The clock ticked in the silence. I stared at it, realizing how much time I had wasted hoping Michael would change, how many years I had spent excusing his arrogance as youthful ambition. Anna had warned me, gently but firmly, that I gave him too much, too easily. Edward, she used to say, you can't hand him the world and then expect him to appreciate it. He needs to earn it, but I hadn't listened. I thought generosity would teach him gratitude. Instead, it had taught him entitlement. I reached for the small table beside my chair and picked up the family album. The leather cover was worn, its corners frayed. I flipped it open slowly, page by page, watching my son grow from a smiling toddler into a man with sharp features and eyes that mirrored mine. But none of the warmth. There was a picture of him holding a toy hammer, grinning at me while I worked on the house. He'd said he wanted to be like me. I remembered that day clearly. I had laughed, tousled his hair, and told him he'd do greater things than I ever could. But as the years passed, that eager boy vanished. In his place came a young man obsessed with appearances, money, and status. He began measuring success not by the effort put in, but by what he could take without giving. I closed the album and set it aside, a heaviness pressing on my chest. It wasn't just disappointment I felt anymore. It was clarity. I finally saw Michael not as the son I wished him to be, but as the man he had chosen to become. And that realization hurt less than I thought it would, because now I knew what I had to do. My phone buzzed on the table, breaking the silence. It was a message from Helen Graves. "Edward, it's time. Call me when you can." I stared at the words for a long moment, the glow of the screen reflecting in the dark room. I'd spoken to Helen weeks before the surgery, when a gnawing instinct told me to prepare for the worst. She had drawn up the documents exactly as I instructed, sealed them with precision. Michael thought my wealth was his future, his safety net. He thought I had already signed everything over, that his inheritance was guaranteed. But he was wrong. The truth of my will was something only Helen and I knew, and when she read it out loud, Michael would finally learn that betrayal doesn't go unpunished. I leaned back, exhaustion weighing down my eyelids, but beneath it all was something else. Resolve, steady and unshakable. This house, though cold and empty, was still mine. My legacy, though threatened, was still mine. My life, though tested, was still mine. And Michael would soon understand that the man he had dismissed as helpless still had strength left. Not in his body, perhaps, but in his mind, in his choices, in the truth that had been written down and sealed. The snow outside thickened, blanketing the streets in silence. I watched it fall through the window, each flake erasing the marks of the day. But unlike the snow, I would not allow my son's betrayal to cover the truth. No. I would make sure it was revealed, in the clearest, most undeniable way possible. I reached for the lamp beside me, but before I could turn it off, I noticed something odd. A shadow flickered across the frosted glass of the window, too quick, too deliberate to be just the wind. I froze. Slowly I leaned forward, straining my ears. The house was silent, but outside, footsteps crunched faintly against the snow. Someone was near, and I had the chilling feeling it wasn't just a passerby. From my chair, I stared at that window, my pulse quickening. The thought clawed at me. Was Michael already circling, waiting for the old man to finally let his guard down? The shadow at the window lingered in my thoughts long after it vanished. I had sat there, holding my breath, straining my ears until the silence of winter pressed against the glass like a weight. But when I finally summoned the courage to rise and peer outside, there was nothing. Only fresh snow, unbroken except for the faintest outline of footprints leading back toward the street. I told myself it could have been a passerby, a neighbor taking a shortcut home, yet something in my gut whispered otherwise. The shape of those steps, the way they pressed deeper near the window, it felt deliberate, like someone had paused there, watching. I locked the front door, checked the windows twice, then settled back into the recliner. But sleep refused to come. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind through the chimney, sharpened my senses until dawn began to creep pale and gray through the curtains. By morning, the house was still cold, my body still weak, but my mind was sharpened by unrest. I made coffee, black and bitter, and sat at the kitchen table with my phone in hand. Helen's message from the night before still glowed on the screen. "Edward, it's time. Call me when you can." I pressed her number and she answered on the second ring. "Mr. Cole," she said, her voice steady, professional as always. "I was wondering when I'd hear from you." "Helen," I rasped, my throat still rough from hospital air. "You said it's time. What did you mean?" There was a pause, then the faint sound of papers being shuffled on her desk. "I received an inquiry yesterday," she said carefully. "From your son." My chest tightened.
Michael?
"Yes. He contacted my office asking whether your estate planning documents had been finalized. Specifically your will." I gripped the edge of the table until my knuckles whitened. So that was why he had abandoned me so easily at the hospital. He wasn't worried about my health. He was already circling, measuring, preparing for what he believed was his inevitable gain. "What did you tell him?" I asked. "That all client matters remain confidential," she said firmly. But Edward, his questions carried a tone, impatience, expectation. "I thought you should know." I closed my eyes, letting the truth sink in. My son had already decided that I was little more than a number in a ledger, a fortune waiting to be transferred. I want to proceed exactly as we planned, I said quietly. Helen's voice softened. Are you certain? It's a harsh blow for him. A bitter laugh escaped me. Harsh? He left me in a hospital bed like I was a stray dog. If he sees me as nothing more than a burden, then he should learn what burden truly means. There was silence on her end, the kind born from respect rather than hesitation. Then she spoke, measured and calm.
Very well.
We'll keep everything sealed. But Edward, there's something else. What is it? I don't like the feeling of this. Michael's inquiries were insistent. If he senses that the will isn't in his favor, he may act rashly. The shadow at the window flashed in my mind. I think he already has, I murmured. Helen's voice sharpened. What do you mean? I told her about the footsteps in the snow, the sense of being watched. She listened without interruption, but I could almost feel her frown through the line. Then you must be cautious, she said finally. Keep your doors locked. Don't meet him alone, and if he presses further, we may need to consider additional legal protections. Her words steadied me, though the unease still clung like frost on glass. Thank you, Helen. I'll be ready when the time comes. We ended the call, but her warning echoed in my mind. Michael wasn't just waiting for my fortune. He was hungry for it, restless, and hunger like that could drive a man to desperate acts. The day passed in uneasy quiet. I tried to distract myself, made a simple breakfast, watered Anna's old plants, straightened the stack of newspapers that had gathered on the porch, but no matter what I did, the thought remained. Michael was circling. By evening, the wind had picked up, rattling the windows, whistling through the gaps in the eaves. I sat in the living room again, the family album open on my lap, though I wasn't really looking at the pictures anymore. My ears were tuned to the outside world, waiting for the faintest crunch of snow, the whisper of movement. And then it came, a thud, not loud but distinct from the back of the house. I set the album aside, my pulse quickening. Slowly I rose, each step measured, careful. I moved through the kitchen toward the rear door. My hand hovered over the light switch, but I didn't flip it. Instead, I peered through the small window set in the door. At first, I saw nothing but swirling snow. Then faintly the outline of footprints again. Fresh ones, leading right up to the back steps, but this time, they didn't turn back. Whoever had come this far was still nearby. I backed away from the door, my breath shallow. The lawyer's warning echoed in my mind. If he senses the will isn't in his favor, he may act rashly. It wasn't just paranoia anymore. Michael wasn't waiting for my death. He was preparing for it. I reached for the phone, Helen's number glowing in my recent calls. My finger hovered over it, but before I could press, another sound rippled through the silence. The faint click of a latch, as though someone were testing the window. I stood frozen in the dark kitchen, the phone cold in my hand, listening to the subtle scrape of metal against glass. And in that moment I realized the truth. My own son wasn't just after my will. He was already trying to break into my life, and maybe even end it before I could stop him. The sound was unmistakable now. The delicate scrape of metal probing at glass, cautious, deliberate. My breath caught in my throat as I stood in the dark kitchen, the phone heavy in my hand. I wanted to believe it was the wind, a tree branch brushing the window pane. But no wind worked a latch so carefully, so patiently. I backed into the shadows, pressing myself against the wall. The old instincts I had buried under years of comfort and routine stirred awake. Instincts of self-preservation, of watchfulness, of a man who had built his life not by luck, but by learning to survive storms. The clicking stopped. For a moment silence, then a slow, soft creak. The window was sliding up. I didn't move. My mind raced. If it was Michael, what was he thinking? That I would be asleep in my chair, too weak to hear, too helpless to resist, that he could slip inside unnoticed, perhaps search for documents, maybe even confront me in the dark. My phone buzzed faintly in my hand, Helen calling me back. The vibration felt like thunder in the silence. I killed the sound with a swipe. Heart pounding, terrified the noise had given me away. A shadow spilled across the floor as the window lifted higher. Then a leg, slow, careful. Someone was climbing in. I moved then, not recklessly, not with noise, but with quiet certainty. I set the phone down on the counter and reached for the drawer near the stove. Inside was no weapon of force, but something more subtle. A flashlight heavy in my hand. I clicked it on just as the intruder's second leg cleared the window. The beam cut through the dark like a blade. It landed squarely on the face of the man crouched in my kitchen. Michael. For a moment, he froze, his eyes wide, his hand halfway to his pocket. The look on his face wasn't shame or even anger. It was calculation, a predator caught mid-prowl. "Dad," he said finally, his voice smooth, rehearsed. "I was worried about you. Thought I'd check in, make sure you were okay." I let the silence hang, the beam fixed on him. His words dripped with false concern, but his body betrayed him. His breathing was quick, his eyes darting toward the hall, toward the rooms where he thought valuables might lie. "You tried the door first?" I asked quietly. My voice surprised me, steady, almost cold. He blinked, thrown off. "The door was locked. I didn't want to wake you, so you climbed through the window?" His mouth opened, then closed again. He forced a laugh. "You're imagining things. I just wanted to make sure you were safe." Safe. The word twisted in my gut. My own son, breaking into my home like a thief, spinning lies without a flicker of hesitation. I lowered the flashlight just slightly, enough to cast shadows across the room instead of blinding him. "You should leave," I said. Michael straightened, dusting off his coat as though nothing unusual had happened. "No need for that. I'm here now. Maybe I'll stay the night, keep you company. You've been alone too long." The way he said it, smooth, charming, but his eyes betrayed the hunger behind it. He wasn't here for company. He was hunting, circling, testing the edges of my defenses. "I'll manage," I replied. "Alone is better than being lied to." That stung him. His jaw tightened, and for the first time I saw the mask crack. His voice dropped lower, sharper. "You don't trust me, do you?" I didn't answer. The silence was answer enough. He stepped closer. Too close. The smell of cold air and cologne clinging to him. "You know, Dad," he said softly, "it's not healthy to be suspicious at your age. Stress can kill a man after surgery. Maybe you should rest. Let someone else handle things." The words chilled me more than the night air seeping through the open window. There was no love in them, only threat, thinly veiled. But instead of retreating, I took a step forward, the flashlight steady in my hand. "You're right," I said calmly. "I should rest. And when I do, I'll rest, knowing that Helen Graves has everything she needs. Every document, every instruction. Nothing for me to worry about." For the first time, true panic flickered in his eyes. He hadn't expected me to name her. Hadn't expected me to remind him that the will wasn't some loose paper he could snatch from a drawer. It was sealed, protected, waiting to be read out loud. Michael forced a smile, but his lips were thin, strained. "Of course," he muttered. "Always so careful, Dad." I kept my gaze steady on him. "Leave, now." The silence stretched between us, a taut wire ready to snap. Then slowly he backed toward the window. With a final glance, sharp as a knife, he climbed back out into the snow. I stood there for a long moment after he was gone, my chest heaving, the flashlight beam trembling against the wall. The air in the kitchen felt colder now, poisoned by his presence. Finally, I shut the window, locked it, and drew the curtains tight. My legs felt weak beneath me, but my resolve burned stronger than ever. Michael was no longer pretending. He had shown me exactly who he was, and I would show him who I still was. The phone buzzed again on the counter. Helen's voice came through the line, urgent and low. "Edward, listen carefully. You don't have much time." Helen's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "Edward, listen carefully. You don't have much time." I gripped the phone tighter, still staring at the window Michael had crawled through minutes earlier. My pulse hadn't slowed, and her words only sharpened the unease clawing at me. "What do you mean?" I asked, forcing my voice steady. Her tone was low, clipped, the way she spoke when she wanted every word to be heard clearly. "Michael's persistence isn't normal. I've had 3 calls from him in 2 days. He's not just curious about your estate anymore. He's pressing, demanding. He wants to know exactly what's written in your will." My chest tightened. "And if he doesn't like what he hears?" There was a pause. Then softly, "Then he may not wait for you to tell him." I sank into the kitchen chair, the phone cold against my ear. The scrape of metal at the window echoed in my mind. He already hadn't waited. He had tested the lock, crossed the line, showed me the lengths he was willing to go. "What should I do?" I asked. Helen's voice softened, but it carried steel beneath it. "You've already done the most important thing. You've prepared. The will is airtight, signed and sealed. But now you need to protect yourself until the day it's read. That means staying sharp, staying alive, and not letting him corner you alone. I closed my eyes, inhaling slowly. He thinks I'm weak. He thinks he can frighten me into giving him what he wants. Then show him he's wrong, she said firmly. The line went quiet after we hung up, but her words stayed. I sat there in the dark kitchen, listening to the furnace hum, and realized something had shifted inside me. I was no longer the father hoping for reconciliation, no longer the man hurt by a son's betrayal. I was a strategist now, a man who had been underestimated, and who would use that underestimation to his advantage. If Michael thought I was helpless, then helpless I would appear. Let him grow confident. Let him believe I had no fight left. All the while, the truth waited in Helen's office, locked in a briefcase, ready to shatter his illusion when the time came. I rose slowly and moved through the house, checking every window, every door, testing the locks twice. At each one, I imagined Michael standing outside, hungry eyes searching for a way in. The thought should have terrified me, but instead it steeled my resolve. This house was my fortress now, and soon it would be my stage. The next few days passed with a tense rhythm. Michael didn't come by again, not in the flesh, but his presence was everywhere. My phone buzzed with his messages. Short, sharp demands disguised as pleasantries. Dad, we need to talk about the future. You should give me access to your accounts. I can help manage things while you rest. Stop making this harder than it needs to be. Each one made the trap feel tighter, not around me, but around him. Because every word, every demand, only revealed more of his desperation. One evening, I found myself in the living room again, the family album open on my lap. My eyes drifted across the old photographs. Michael as a boy, standing proudly with his first fishing rod. Michael at his high school graduation, grinning wide while I clapped from the audience. Michael holding Anna's hand at a family picnic, pretending to be the dutiful son. I traced a finger over his younger face, wondering when exactly he had turned. Was it gradual, or had it always been inside him, waiting? Anna used to say that greed doesn't appear out of nowhere. It grows in the shadows when gratitude is absent, and gratitude had been absent in Michael for years. The phone rang again. "Helen, Edward," she said when I answered. "I want you to consider something." "What's that?" "We could arrange for the will to be read privately, just between you, me, and Michael. Safer that way. Less exposure." I considered it, but the thought left me cold. "No," I said finally. "This isn't just about Michael knowing the truth. It's about him facing it. And that means witnesses. Family, friends, if I can gather them. He needs to hear the words out loud. And he needs others to hear them too. There can't be any denial, any twisting. It has to be final." Helen didn't argue. "Then I'll prepare accordingly. But Edward, be careful. A man cornered is unpredictable." Her warning echoed long after the call ended. That night I moved through the house in silence, double-checking locks, peering out into the snowy yard. Every shadow looked like Michael's. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like a footstep. But instead of fear, I felt something else now. Anticipation. Because I wasn't just waiting for him. I was preparing for him. I began leaving lights on in different rooms at night, to keep him guessing where I was. I moved valuables, not that many remained, into boxes and locked them away, not for my sake, but to frustrate him. I even left the family album open on the table, a silent reminder that while he was scheming for money, I still remembered the boy he used to be. Let him see it if he ever got in. Let him feel the weight of what he had lost. By the end of the week, Helen had sent me the details. The will would be read at her office in 2 weeks' time. Invitations would go out to the few relatives still in contact, along with Michael. There would be no secrecy, no chance for him to spin the story his way. 2 weeks. That was all I had to endure. But I knew Michael wouldn't wait patiently. On the 7th night, just as I was settling into the recliner, a noise shattered the quiet. Not a scrape this time, not a test of a latch, a bang. The back door rattled against its frame, followed by another thud, louder, angrier. Michael wasn't testing anymore. He was pushing. I rose slowly, the phone in my hand, Helen's number ready to dial. But as the third blow shook the door, a realization settled cold in my chest. Michael wasn't here to search. He was here to break through. The banging on the back door that night had shaken me, but Michael hadn't gotten through. The locks had held, the deadbolt secured. After a long silence, I heard his car start and drive away, tires skidding in the snow. He hadn't been ready to cross the line completely. Not yet, and that was when I knew he would try another way. Michael was clever enough to realize brute force would bring police. Questions, neighbors watching? No, he would try charm next. The boy who once used his grin to talk his way out of trouble was now a grown man who thought he could outwit me at my own table. The invitation came the next morning in a text, short and sugary. "Dad, let's have dinner this weekend. Just the two of us. I want to make things right. I'll cook." I stared at the glowing words, knowing they were bait, a trap wrapped in warmth, but part of me wanted to see him try. So I replied, "Fine. Saturday night. I'll bring dessert." The snow had settled heavy on the rooftops by Saturday, a white blanket muffling the world. I drove slowly to Michael's house, the same house I had helped him purchase 5 years ago. I still remembered signing the down payment check, Anna's hand squeezing mine in pride. "This is what family is for," she'd whispered that day. Now pulling into the driveway, I felt none of that pride, only the bitter taste of irony. The door opened before I knocked. Michael stood there, dressed too neatly for a home-cooked dinner. Crisp shirt, tie loosened just enough to suggest comfort. His smile stretched wide, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Dad," he boomed, arms open as though nothing had ever happened. Come in, come in. You must be freezing." I stepped past him into the warmth of the house. The air smelled of roasted chicken, garlic, herbs, a performance dinner if there ever was one. The table was already set, candles lit. "Looks like you've been busy," I said, laying my coat over the chair. "Anything for my old man," Michael replied, too quickly, like a salesman closing a pitch. We sat. He carved the chicken, poured me a glass of wine, all the gestures of a dutiful son. But his eyes flicked constantly to me, studying, measuring. "So," he said finally, leaning back, fork tapping against his plate. "I've been thinking about the future." "Whose future?" I asked evenly. "Ours, the family's." He smiled again, but this time I saw the tension at the corner of his mouth. "I know things have been strained, but I want to make it right. I want to help you. You've worked hard your whole life. Maybe it's time to let someone else take on the responsibility. Ease your burden." "By someone else?" I said, sipping my wine. "You mean you?" His eyes flashed for just a second before he laughed. "Who else?" "Look, Dad, I'm not asking for much. Just access to some of the accounts, maybe co-ownership of the house. That way, if something were to happen, things wouldn't be so messy." I set my glass down slowly. "Messy," I repeated. "Yes," he said, leaning forward, voice dropping lower. "You're not getting younger. You've already had one surgery. What if next time you're not so lucky? Don't you think it would be better to have everything prepared, signed over, seamless?" There it was, the mask slipping. His words sounded like concern, but the hunger in his eyes betrayed him. He wasn't picturing my comfort. He was picturing himself standing alone in this house, pockets full of what I had built. "You seem awfully concerned with what happens when I'm gone," I said. "Because I care." He snapped, too sharply, then forced a smile again. "Because I want to honor what you've worked for." I let the silence stretch, watching him squirm. Then I said very softly, "You don't need to worry about that, Michael. Everything's already taken care of." His fork froze halfway to his mouth. "Taken care of? What does that mean?" "It means," I said, holding his gaze, "that you'll find out soon enough." The color drained from his face. He tried to recover, chuckling nervously. "Come on, Dad, you're being dramatic." "Why wait? Just tell me." "We're family. Family doesn't leave their father to rot in a hospital bed," I said flatly. The air went cold. For the first time all evening, Michael had no quick reply. He set his fork down with deliberate care, his jaw tight. "You're still angry about that," he said finally. "I told you it wasn't like that. Things were complicated." "No," I said, standing. "Things were simple. You made a choice. And so did I." His eyes followed me as I put on my coat. There was a flicker of panic in them now, a crack in his performance. He stood quickly, reaching out as though to stop me. "Dad, wait. Please. Just tell me what you meant about everything being taken care of. What does that mean?" I looked at him one last time, the son I had once carried on my shoulders, taught to ride a bike, prayed for at night, and I saw only a man who wanted to strip me down to nothing. "You'll know soon," I said, "and so will everyone else." I walked out before he could speak again, the cold air biting my face like truth itself. That night, Helen called. "He pushed, didn't he?" she asked, her tone already knowing. "Yes," I said. "He pushed, and he'll keep pushing." "Then it's time to tighten the trap," she said. "I'll move the will reading up. No more delays. If Michael's growing desperate, that means he's close to breaking. Better to strike before he does," I agreed. My hands shook as I hung up, but it wasn't fear anymore. It was resolve. The pieces were in place now. Michael thought he had cornered me, but in truth, he was the one walking into the cage. The family dinner had been his performance. The will reading would be mine. And as I sat alone in my house, the family album still open on the table, I whispered to the empty room, "When the lawyer reads my will, Michael, you'll finally see who's really been watching all along." The morning of the will reading arrived with a gray sky hanging heavy over the town, clouds swollen with more snow. The air carried that sharp scent of winter, the kind that clung to your coat and reminded you that time never stopped for anyone. It was fitting. The day would be as cold and merciless as the truth about to be revealed. Helen Graves had arranged everything in her downtown office. A wide conference room with a polished oak table stood ready, its long surface gleaming under the yellow light of brass lamps. On one side rested thick folders and a small leather case, the very documents that would strip away every last illusion Michael had been clinging to. When I arrived, Helen greeted me with a firm nod. She looked more like a judge than a lawyer that day. Her black suit crisp, her hair pulled back in a no-nonsense twist. She carried herself like someone who had already weighed the evidence and found it damning. "Are you ready?" she asked. "As ready as I'll ever be," I answered, my voice steady but my heart racing. "Good. Then let him walk right into it." Michael arrived late, as expected. He liked to make an entrance. When he finally strode into the conference room, he was dressed too sharply again. Navy suit, gold cufflinks glinting. But the swagger in his step was brittle. His eyes darted from Helen to me and back again, searching for clues. "Dad," he said, his voice all forced warmth. "Helen, I didn't know this was going to be such a formal meeting." "You could have just told me at dinner." Helen didn't even look up as she organized her folders. "Formal is necessary. Matters of inheritance always are." The word hung in the air. Inheritance. I saw the flicker in Michael's eyes, greed thinly masked as curiosity. He sat opposite me, folding his hands like a man trying to look patient while his mind clawed for the prize he thought he was about to win. "Shall we begin?" Helen said, her tone cutting the room into silence. She opened the first folder and began with the preamble. The will, she explained, had been drafted years ago but updated only recently. It included not just financial assets but personal property, investments, even sentimental items. Michael shifted in his chair with each word, leaning forward slightly, waiting for the confirmation he'd been expecting his whole life. That he would be the heir, the chosen one, the man who would take control once I was gone. Helen's voice was calm, deliberate. "To my beloved son, Michael Cole," she paused, her eyes flicking up just briefly, catching the eager glint in his. "I leave my collection of fishing rods and the framed photograph of our first trip to the lake." The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the faint hum of the heating vent. Michael blinked. His mouth opened, then closed again. "I'm sorry, what?" Helen continued smoothly, her eyes back on the papers. "To my trusted lawyer and executor, Helen Graves, I leave the authority to distribute the remainder of my estate according to the stipulations outlined within." Michael's face flushed crimson. "Fishing rods? A photograph? That's it? That's all?" Helen snapped the folder shut and met his gaze. "That is all, Mr. Cole. The remainder has been reassigned." Michael shot to his feet. "Reassigned? To who? To what?" His voice cracked with the sharpness of a man who had just seen the floor crumble under his feet. I stood slowly, every movement deliberate. "To charity, to scholarships, to causes your mother and I believed in. Every cent of it, every property, every investment. Everything is locked away where you cannot touch it." Michael's jaw worked furiously, his hands curled into fists, trembling with fury. "You can't do this. You can't just cut me out." "Yes, I can," I said, my voice calm as winter frost. And I did. Because a son who leaves his father to rot in a hospital bed doesn't deserve a penny of what that father built. The words landed like blows. His face contorted, caught between rage and disbelief. He looked to Helen as if she might save him, but she only arched an eyebrow. "The will is legally binding, Mr. Cole," she said. "Your father's decisions are final." Michael's eyes darted back to me, wild now. "You think this is justice? You think leaving me with nothing will make up for your mistakes? For the way you—" "No," I interrupted. "This isn't about my mistakes. This is about yours. You abandoned me when I needed you most, and now you'll live with what that choice cost you." The room fell into silence again, the kind that stretched and deepened until even the sound of breathing felt too loud. Michael sank back into his chair, his shoulders slumping, but his eyes burned with something darker now. Humiliation, the kind that cuts deeper than anger. "You'll regret this," he hissed. "No," I said quietly, leaning closer across the table. "The only regret here is yours, and it's one you'll carry for the rest of your life." Helen closed the final folder, her expression unreadable. "This meeting is concluded. Mr. Cole, I'll have copies of the documentation sent to you by the end of the day." Michael shoved his chair back, the legs scraping harshly against the floor. He stormed out of the room, slamming the door so hard the walls trembled. For a long moment, Helen and I sat in silence. The echoes of his fury faded down the hall, swallowed by the gray winter outside. Finally, Helen said, "It's done." "He knows," I nodded slowly. Relief didn't wash over me like I thought it would. Instead, it was something colder, sharper. Not victory. Not triumph. Just the quiet certainty that justice had finally been spoken aloud. As I walked out into the snow, the town square spread before me. I felt the weight of it all. Years of work, years of sacrifice, years of believing family would hold strong. But Michael had chosen his path, and now he would walk it alone. The will wasn't just paperwork. It was a mirror held up to his face for the world to see, and the reflection was ugly. That night, as I returned to my house, I found muddy footprints on the back porch, fresh ones leading right to the door. The will had been read, but Michael wasn't finished. Not yet. The storm rolled in by nightfall, snow driving sideways across the windows, rattling the shutters like skeletal fingers. The whole house creaked under the weight of wind and winter. I sat alone in my study, the fire crackling low, papers neatly stacked on the desk where I had once dreamed of teaching Michael the family trade. But those dreams were ashes now, same as the logs in the hearth. The footprints on the back porch hadn't been erased by the storm. I'd seen them clearly in the weak glow of the security light, fresh, deliberate. They led right to my door. He had left them for me to see. I didn't call the police. I didn't even think about it. Tonight was not about law or order. Tonight was about truth. The first sound came just after midnight, the faint scrape of metal against the lock. A pause, then another scrape, more forceful this time. I leaned back in my chair, my hand resting on the phone on the desk, but I didn't dial. Instead, I watched the knob twist slowly, the old brass gleaming in the firelight. The door swung inward with a groan, and there he was. Michael, his hair plastered from snow, his eyes wild, his coat half-buttoned as though he had torn himself free from the storm to reach me. "Dad," he said, his voice sharp with something between rage and desperation. "We need to talk." "Breaking into my home doesn't sound like talking," I replied. My tone was calm, steady, even as my heart hammered in my chest. He stepped inside, slamming the door behind him. Snowflakes melted instantly on the rug, leaving small dark stains that would linger longer than either of us cared to admit. "You think you humiliated me today," he said, pacing across the room. "You think cutting me out, making me look like a fool in front of Helen, in front of everyone, is justice?" "I don't think," I said, meeting his gaze. "I know," he stopped, his face twisting. "Everything you have, everything you built, it should have been mine. Mom would have wanted that. Don't drag your mother into this," I snapped, the anger breaking through for the first time. "She raised you better than this. She believed in you, and you betrayed every bit of that belief the day you walked away from me in that hospital." His jaw clenched, his hands balled into fists at his sides. "You left me no choice. Do you think I want to scrape by while you sit on millions? You could have given me security, comfort. But no, you kept it locked up, dangling it over me like I was some child begging for scraps." "You're not a child," I said, rising slowly from my chair. "You're a grown man. And the security, the comfort, the life, you could have built it yourself. But instead, you decided to take what wasn't yours." He laughed bitterly, shaking his head. "You don't get it. You never got it. You built your empire, and I was supposed to be the heir. That's how it works. Fathers pass it on to their sons. That's the legacy." "No," I said quietly. "The legacy is the lessons, the values, the integrity. And you threw all of that away." The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. The storm battered against the windows, wind howling like the ghosts of every mistake we'd both made. Finally, Michael reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a knife, not large, but sharp. The kind of blade meant for cutting rope or opening boxes. His hand trembled as he pointed it toward me. "You'll rewrite it," he said. His voice cracked, thin and frayed. "You'll change the will tonight, or I swear I'll—" "You'll what?" I asked, stepping closer, unflinching. "Kill me, that's your plan? That's the son I raised?" His arm shook harder now, the knife wavering. I could see the storm inside him, not just rage but shame, fear, the crumbling of a man who had gambled everything and lost. "You don't understand," he shouted, his voice breaking. "I can't go back to nothing. I can't live without it. You don't know what it's like." I took one more step until the point of the blade was inches from my chest. My eyes locked on his, steady, unblinking. "You're wrong," I said softly. "I do know what it's like. I started with nothing, and I built everything alone. If you had even half the strength, half the will, half the heart, you could have done the same. But you didn't, because you wanted easy. And there is nothing easy about being a man." The knife quivered. His lip trembled, and then with a choked sound his arm fell. The blade clattered against the hardwood floor, the sound sharp and final. Michael sank to his knees, his hands covering his face. His shoulders heaved with sobs that sounded more like fury tearing itself apart from the inside. "I just wanted it to be mine," he whispered through his hands. "I just wanted to be somebody." I looked down at him, my chest heavy, my eyes burning with a grief I hadn't allowed myself until that moment. "You could have been," I said. "You still could, but not this way. Never this way. I didn't call the police that night. I didn't need to. The real punishment had already begun." When Michael finally staggered out into the storm, coat open, eyes red and hollow, I knew the truth would follow him forever. He hadn't just lost an inheritance, he had lost himself, and that was a prison no walls could contain. I closed the door behind him, the storm muffling his retreat until it was swallowed by the night. For the first time in years, I stood in my house, alone, but unbroken. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was honest. Anna's photograph smiled from the mantel, her eyes kind, forgiving. I touched the frame gently. "He made his choice," I whispered, and so did I. The fire crackled, the storm raged, but inside the house, there was peace. And as I turned out the lights and let the darkness settle, I knew this was not the end of Michael's story. Only the beginning of his reckoning. Michael thought he could abandon his father and still inherit everything. Instead, he inherited nothing but shame. Justice wasn't written in the courtroom or the bank. It was written in the silence of that final night, when the storm swallowed him whole. But tell me, do you believe Edward truly won, or did he only survive what his own son became? If this story gripped you, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and comment below where you're watching from. And answer me this: if your own child betrayed you for money, would you forgive them, or let them face the reckoning they deserve?